Okay, so one of the things that I occasionally like to do is I like to take a project that I'm working on and make it 10 times more difficult to do because I decide to document some process of it. And it's worth me doing that because I think it brings a really valuable insight to what actually goes on when you're scoring something. And one of the things that I've been wanting to focus on for a really long time is this mystery that surrounds getting music from the mock-up stage where you're creating it in the computer and it's all living in sample instruments in the DAW, in my case Cubase, and then turning that somehow into notes on a piece of paper which can be read by an orchestra, and then recording that and then putting that back into the DAW and having a result. It's something that if you didn't have the privilege to go to college for music or haven't had the budgets to deal with on any of your own projects, it's just a thing that can be a little bit of a mystery. And so what I thought would be fun and hopefully valuable for you is to actually document the process from having a completed demo version of the score through to recording the orchestra. And there was a project that came along with an amazing channel called No One Studio on YouTube for a short film of theirs. And it was just the exact right kind of project for me to document this. And so I did the thing I like to do where I make my life a lot harder by not just doing the work, but actually documenting it at the same time. And as I was documenting this process, kind of start to finish, it was just turning into like a behemoth video. And so I realized in order for each part of this to really get the care and attention that it deserves, this is going to need to be a 3-part video. So if you're watching this, you're currently watching part 1 of 3 parts. I've finished all 3 parts at this point. This is me in the future editing these videos, deciding that it needs to actually be 3 parts. So I got to go through and kind of host all 3 of these. And what we're going to go through is basically 3 distinct sections or processes that are a part of orchestrating for a score. The first of those, which is this video, is going to be taking my MIDI mockup, cleaning up that session, and actually preparing for it to be notated. The second video is going to be actually taking that cleaned up MIDI, importing it into Dorico, and notating it, actually putting notes on a page and making decisions for dynamics and things like that. And then the third part is going to be actually recording it with the orchestra and the result. I have a tendency to be sort of long-winded, and so yeah, this was going to be like a 3-hour video. But instead it's going to be 3 hopefully slightly shorter parts that allow me to go as in-depth as I'd like to go while still being, somewhat watchable in a single sitting, or at least just a couple. So yeah, get ready for a deep dive in orchestration. I'm really excited to share this with you. Part 1 of the video, like I said, is going to be me going through the actual cleanup of the session itself to prepare for notation. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so I have a very particular approach to orchestration. I do not do what, well, I honestly, I don't know. I haven't worked with orchestrators. I've always orchestrated for my own work or been the orchestrator for others. So it's possible actually that this is what everyone does. I never learned it from anyone. I just sort of stumbled upon this method of doing things. It's probably close to what everyone does. But basically what I learned as I was starting to orchestrate others' music especially, but even my own, doing all the work in the notation software is really slow for me. I work in Cubase all day, every day, and so I am fastest in a DAW. And so what I realized was if I offload some of the work from my notation software and do it here in Cubase, I can orchestrate way faster. And so what that looks like is if you look here in my template, I have my different instrument groups, and I have like the mock-up sequencing that I've done for them. But if you look at these gray tracks here, These are just blank MIDI tracks that don't go to anything, they don't make any noise. And what I do is I put an individual MIDI track for every instrument or group of instruments, in the case of strings, that will be on a staff in the notation software. And so what that means is that I can copy over my MIDI from my mockups, I can clean it up, I can perfectly quantize it, including entrances and exits of the notes, and I can put the notes exactly as they're going to be in the MIDI here. And then when I export a MIDI file, I take all of these MIDI tracks and I just export these. And when I import them to now Dorico, they come in perfectly in time, the right pitches, everything exactly as it needs to be. And then from there, all I need to do is dynamics, articulation, and some other things, as you'll see when we get to that section. But basically what I do is I go section by section. So we'll start with strings. Strings are kind of the backbone of everything I write, but this film in particular. And we'll just go through, and I'm just going to sort of explain how I go from the mock-up, because I make choices in mock-up. When I know I'm going to be going live, which I did in this one, I do try to mock up kind of one-to-one. I don't always, and there's some stuff, like I have some ensemble patches here that will actually have to make choices, and I do that at this point. I do make these choices to what notes go to what string instruments specifically, so that once I export, everything's correct and I'm not having to make those choices in the notation software. So if you look, like, there's a lot more than we need here. One of the reasons for that is when I program strings, one of my go-to things is I have Cinematic Studio solo strings, which is CSSS, and then Cinematic Studio strings, and I double them. So like, it's not like there's actually all these parts. Like, this is really just this, but it's doubled. So, it's going to be a lot cleaner when we actually move that over into the MIDI here. So if we start, I'll just sort of show you what this beginning sounds like in the strings. It sounds like this. Okay, sweet. So that is what we have here, and the way that I'm going to, again, I did this pretty intentionally. So let's see how I did this. So I have a violin 1 part. Let's just start with that, and that's this. This is kind of the motif for this film, this A sharp to F sharp thing. And I can't wait to break down this score for you. Hopefully I can do like an actual score breakdown of this film. I don't really want to talk about it yet, because this is probably going to come out before the film does. And when it does, I'll do a more in-depth breakdown of this score, because there's some pretty nerdy stuff in here I really like. And so I gave that to just the first violins, which is the largest violin group. So they're playing this simple little motif. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that part, and I'm just going to copy. I'm going to put it up into violin 1. And then the thing I do from here is I get rid of all of my modulation information. I get rid of any like aftertouch information. And then I make sure that I delete my key switches. And key switches are important because they're going to be basically like what articulations we need to give the strings. But when I actually go to notate, I have my Cubase session open as well, and I reference what it sounds like. So that I'm making the correct choices in terms of articulation. So as you can see, in order to get these to sound correctly, they're not quantized. But I know they need to be half notes, so let's quantize them. This is one of my like go-to key commands I did. Basically, it forces the length to match the quantize, and then I can do legato so that it connects. So this is, if you listen to the violin 1s, it'll look like this. Oh, whoops. Sorry, here we go. Right? And I just go to where that's supposed to be let off, which is at that measure right there. So now, it went from looking like this, where it's not quite perfectly in time, to the MIDI part where it is perfectly in time. And that is essentially what I'm going to spend the next however many hours doing. This video is probably going to span multiple days just because I'm probably going to get notes on another project I need to jump into. So if you see me at a cut and I'm wearing a different outfit, that's what's going on. But I'm going to montage through a lot of this. I'll stop and talk about something when I feel like it's interesting. But yeah, so I'm just going to get to work and you get to watch me work. And I promise I won't make it longer than it needs to be. And I'll stop and I'll talk when something interesting happens. So here's how I do it. So already we've gotten to something interesting here. So I actually put both of these lines in violins 2 and not in viola. And that was intentional. This is a really light moment. And there's kind of these clustery parts, as you can see here. Like it's very close. And I don't want it to be very brazen the way that it would be in like the upper register of the viola. And also it'll split, it'll divisi the violin 2 section, which basically what that means is that it's going to not have as many people playing it. So really all we're going to hear is this violin 1 melody with a much softer in the orchestra version of these sort of like harmonic harmony notes. And so that's intentional. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that up and I'm just going to put it on top of one another and I paste them together. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to do the same thing where I delete my modulation and I delete my key switch. And then I'm going to quantize them correctly. Boom, boom. Make them all the right length. And now this will be on a divisi part on the staff. And it will be, yeah, just the correct harmonies. Right? And it's all perfect, and it perfectly lines up with the violin 1 part. This is all of them together. But yeah, that's what I mean. Like the orchestration choices I'm making are very intentional, even from when I'm mocking up, because I know that's what it's going to be. So I'm trying to save myself time down the line. But that is an example of the kind of choice I might make when someone else sends me something and they weren't thinking that way. Is like just thinking about this texture. I think it'll work better with violin 1s in unison, violin 2s divisiing that part. So I'm going to keep going. These cellos, so I have them actually playing a melody, but then it goes to this effecty kind of patch that is an ensemble patch, but I put it in the same range. So if you listen to this, this is how it sounds. And then it swaps to this. And it has these like random little tremolos and stuff. And I'll show you how I do that in notation. But basically in terms of how it applies to the MIDI just needs to be the note that it is. So like if you look at what I did for the MIDI, da, 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 and then where it switches to the, actually it probably should switch like here, like right at 20. So I'm going to do a new MIDI note at 20 where I'm going to switch the articulation, and you'll see how that comes into Dorico. But again, I'm sort of making decisions on how I know it's going to be. I'm going to have to do work on this in Dorico to get it to be played correctly, but the note is right, and that's what I'm focused on in the MIDI section. So I'm going to keep going. Okay, so this is a good thing to recognize. Cinematic Studio Strings, which is what is playing this double bass part right now, automatically makes the bass sound down an octave, but Dorico will import it at the written octave, so it will actually come in as an octave above where it needs to be. So I need the MIDI notes to match the sounding note, not the written note. So basically what that means is I have to transpose down all my bass stuff. Even though that's not how it is in my original MIDI, it needs to be below the cellos, as you can see here. Because when I import into Dorico, Dorico's assuming that MIDI is like the absolute pitch. It's the pitch that sounds, not the pitch that's written. Because on a double bass staff, it will be written an octave above where it sounds, but we need to import the MIDI from the sounding pitch so it puts it on the correct part in the staff. So that's why I pulled that down. So like here's a good example. So I have this cluster patch, and we're gonna have to figure out how to notate this. But basically what it means is that violin 1s are going to be busy doing whatever this is. So I'm going to have to figure that out in notation. But what I want to do, at least for now, is just put a note there, even though it's not necessarily the right note, just so I have something that goes into the MIDI. So I'm going to paste that into my violin 1s, and it's just going to last as long as those clusters need to last, which is up till there. But the other reason that it's interesting is because I think originally I had violin ones doubling this, so that I had violin ones and violin twos both playing this line, and then violas and cellos playing the bottom line. If you look at them together, they're like this. But now it's just violin twos playing that, and then violas and cellos playing the other one. So what that means is that the bottom one's going to have a lot more volume because violas and cellos are louder and there's more people playing it. So when I do this, I'm going to have my violin twos are going to play the top line, cellos are going to play the bottom line, and then my violas are going to divisi, so half the section plays the top and half plays the bottom. So I'm going to make sure that both are there in the MIDI part for them. So again, just orchestration choices to try to create balance. Violin ones are busy, so let's make sure all of violin twos are playing the top, all the cellos are playing the bottom, and then violas are split into VC. But what we actually have in the strings, if you listen down here, is we have these clusters. Okay, so doing that is tricky. That's gonna have to be a notate thing specifically, but I do know that I'm gonna want like a start and end note the way that I build these glisses in my notation. So the way that I'm gonna do that is just like somewhere here, I'm gonna pick a note. We'll probably make it C sharp since that's where we were at, and I'll just make it I'll make it like an eighth note probably, and then I'll add one toward the end of the glisses, which is up here. I'll make it like 2 octaves higher, and then I'll do that same thing. And you'll see why when I go to notate why I did that. But that's how I'm going to do that. And basically to just put 2 notes there. I'll get rid of the rest of the middle and add some instructions and maybe change the notes. But yeah, you'll see kind of how I come up with that. So that's that choice. Okay, in this next section, I have this just like long sustain patch. All like soltasto, flautando kind of thing. And it's 3. And the violas don't do anything. So let's just give this to the 3 instruments here. So I'm going to clean it up first. And then let's quantize it and make it end where it needs to end, which is right here. Okay. And then we'll just copy it down. So this is violin 1, violin 2, violin 3. Violin 1 is going to be on top. Violin 2 is in the middle. And then viola, violin 3 viola is on the bottom. And so now we have all 3 notes and they all have a place to go. So that covers that. And then this stuff is more straightforward, so I'll keep going here. Okay, this is good to show because this is where like releases and stuff become really important. So I don't know, Dorico might handle this better in Finale, but see how these are like not a specific note length? Well, they're supposed to be eighth notes. So we actually want to make them as long as eighth notes so they don't come in as like 16ths or something. Obviously, these ones are 16ths, and then these ones are eighths. But I'm being really specific about the length and where they end so that I don't get weird like holdovers or they don't come into the notation the wrong length. Like they're actually the length that they're supposed to be in the notation. Alrighty, so when all is said and done, what I have is all this crazy MIDI for all these strings, everything you see in red, is turned very nicely into these 5 MIDI tracks that I can export, and they're all clean and everything is quantized and exactly the length that it needs to be and will import really, really beautifully. Yeah, so there's that. So that's string, so then we'll move on to brass. So it's the same thing here, but it's obviously, there's a lot less going on. So this though is like this, it gets a little bit more interpretation going on here because I use a lot more ensemble patches for brass. So let's look at horns first. So we have a 2 horn part, but we have 4 horns. So let's just clean it all up. We'll take this up to horn 1 and we will get it cleaned up. Boom. And then these are all supposed to be half notes. So we'll quantize them, force the length, quantize this. This needs to go to the end. Here it actually breaks it into 4 parts because we have 4 horns. And then, okay, so this is kind of weird. So basically we have well, let's keep this last part where it breaks out separate. But we have two different parts essentially, right? So we need a high part and a low part. So this is going to be the high part. This is going to be the low part. And in horns, so typically you would think it would go horn 1 is the highest, horn 2 is the next highest, horn 3 is the next highest, horn 4 is the next highest. But traditionally it's possible in like film music people just do it like that, and I'm sure if I did they'd be fine. But in more traditional orchestration, the horns are in high-low pairs. So horn 1 and 2 is actually high and low, and then horn 3 and 4 is high and low. So I don't really know. Budapest is where I'm recording. I don't know if that's how they set it up. They could just swap parts if they set it up differently. I do it the traditional way. So I do high-low pairs. So horn 1 and 3 are going to be the high part. Horn 2 and 4 are going to be the low part. So if you have a 4-voiced chord, in the case of this right here, the way that I voice this is that horn 1 is the highest voice. Horn 3 is the next highest voice. Horn 2 is the next highest voice. Horn 4 is the lowest voice. So if you look at them in pairs, horn 1 and 2 are in a high-low pair. Horn 3 and 4 are in a high-low pair. And it's actually even nice because this is like a very clustery chord, but they're in like fourth pairs. So this is G, D, and this is F sharp, C sharp, which, you know, it helps with tuning too, rather than trying to tune to like a minor second right next to you. So I don't know, you know, that might be more than I need to do, but I do it that way. I've always done it that way, and that's just a little small orchestration thing you could maybe neglect, but yeah, that's what I do. Okay, so next are our trumpets, and so for this one, I only have one line, and I want all 3 trumpets to play it. So I am going to have them all on this. Again, this is pretty simple, but I think you'll be surprised with the orchestra how effective it is. Let me clean it up first. And yeah, so I want all 3 trumpets to play it in unison, so I'm actually going to copy it into all 3 trumpet parts. And I'll keep going. Same thing with the trombones. So like if you look here, like I used multiple samples to get this trombone part, but I'm combining them in the MIDI. So it has a sus part, and then it goes to a short, and then the sus part again. So when I combine that in the MIDI, I just paste them all together, and it's all the parts, because I don't want that separate. I want that all on one staff, because obviously it's just one person playing it. So like here in the horns, I have a unison line at the end, but then there's only a 3-voice buildup, and I don't really want to add a 4th. So the way that I'm going to do this is that the low horns, again, horns 2 and 4 are going to both play the bottom note. So you have more of that foundation. And then horn 3 will play the middle one. And horn 1 will play the top one. And then they all play the unison line. Okay, so yeah, there's all my brass information and MIDI cleaned up and put where it needs to go. So let's move on to the last part of this, which is the woodwinds. So the woodwinds actually have doubling. And Dorico handles this way better than Finale did. So the way that I do this is that flute 2 doubles on piccolo, and I do use piccolo in this, and then clarinet 2 doubles on bass clarinet, and I also use bass clarinet on this. So they're all on their own staff, and then they're smartly connected in Dorico. So I actually notate them all on their own staff so that it goes in that way. And there's 2 players for each. So oboe has 2 players, clarinet has 2 players. And you don't, I actually kind of actively avoid unisons between the players. So like, you know, even though this is the only 2 melodic instruments, well, actually I think there's strings going on too. It's just not important to me that like both clarinets play the same thing and both oboes play the same thing. It's totally fine that just one player does each part. It'll actually, the tuning and the result will be a little bit better. And I did something I thought was kind of cool on this, where the clarinet, just like the violin ones in the beginning of this, I don't know if you remember, plays the motif both times. Ba-dum, ba-dum, and then the oboe kind of goes inside of it. And it's just nice, like voice crossing like that can be really cool, especially within woodwinds. I do it a lot actually in woodwinds, a lot more than I do with any other instrument group, just because the colors and the blends are really cool. And then we have this doubling the high harmonic strings, which I'm just so freaking excited to hear in the room. Piccolo and flute doubling the high harmonic, so it's super high piccolo and flute, and then high string harmonics. So it's got that piercing but airy kind of quality to it, and I think those two things together, it's all like when I record orchestra, the thing that makes it so special is the combination of stuff in the room. It's what samples just can't get you, like the aggregate result of all of these things put together in a very specific way. So this is one of those textures. Again, it's super simple. It's just really high piccolo and flute and really high string harmonics playing like this little melody harmony thing. But just having it together in the room, I just know it's gonna be super cool. So I'm very excited about it. Okay, now we get somewhere very interesting, because I didn't really realize that I did this. In this part of the score, I didn't do any woodwinds. So like we have all these parts here. Like if I unmute the wood or unsolo the woodwinds, like there's stuff going on. This is like the biggest part. Here, right? So I should have woodwinds doing something. It just wasn't really necessary to kind of sell the idea. And samples can sometimes make them sound too prominent too, but they're going to be buried by these big strings and brass, but we want them in there. Like we want to hear that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find good doubles. So like a great double would be this, you know, these horns have this high-low part that goes the whole time. Like let's grab this and let's have the bassoons do this high-low part with them. So I'm gonna copy this because it's kind of like the main motif thing. So let's get some more players on that. So we'll have them do that. And then we'll also actually in a pair, well, okay, so we're gonna do this first. So let's grab this and let's move it up to our bassoon line. So our bassoons are doing that with the horns. Let's just kind of finish bassoons out through here. Build this 4-note thing up from with the clarinets and the bassoons. So here, let's grab it and let's throw it in here. Clarinet 1 should be the highest. This should be the lowest. This should be the next highest. This should be the next. Yeah, there we go. That's it. Okay, that's how I want it voiced. So we get that in there. So bassoons are done. We should have bass clarinet ripping this bass line, I think. So let's hear where that kind of starts. Clarinet doing something. Clarinet, I think, could join. Let's see. These key switches are gonna kill me. Let's have clarinets do violin 2. Clarinet 1 can do violin 2. And obviously, if I really end up hating this, I'll know on the day, and I can just tell the woodwinds to chill out here and not play. But, okay, oboes and flutes, we're going to be a little bit more intentional because those are going to, like, really pop. So we're going to wait to where that might make sense. So let's see. So right there, it starts to pop. So we're going to have this. In octaves, it's going to go in oboe 1 and 2. See, oboe 2 is going to play this cue. So oboes come in here. In octaves. goes up here, we're going to give it to piccolo and flute. We're going to give it to piccolo and flute so they join in. So we're going to keep these down the upper octave. So you can just hear how that's like growing the orchestration out and just adding more instruments so that by the end, when we're full orchestra, everyone in the orchestra is I didn't add a bunch of new stuff, but there is something going on here. For this, we added some low clusters here. I might have the flutes and oboes do something weird. Yeah, I probably should, honestly. But I might, like, just figure that out in the real time. I think that's what it is. It's that cluster right there. So maybe I'll have them do like kind of flutes can do flutter tongue on that. Yeah, that would be really cool. So flutes. Grab that guy and then piccolo can grab this guy. And that's a second, so that'll just be so close and rubby and they'll be flutter tonguing it, so it'll sound like terrible. Sometimes I do, and I might do this, I just write as high as possible. Which, you know, is, I don't know if that's the way to do it or not, but let's have oboe 1 and 2 do this. Boom, and I'll adjust this when we get to notation. But at least now I'll have something here, so I'll like remember to actually do this, you know. Make them that long. Okay, so now everyone plays something over that, which is great. Okay, so then for here, all I did at the end of this whole section was, I mean, I guess I don't, it just did this. Yeah. So, yeah, it's just kind of crazy. Let's get it cleaned up, shall we? So, obviously, we want to go back to piccolo for this. But yeah, that is woodwinds done now. So, this, you know, this is a preliminary effort. I will maybe make changes, but this is sort of just the general of what we need. So now I go through, I select all of these, get them all selected, all my cleaned MIDI, solo them, so that we're only getting this, and then I go File, Export, MIDI file. So yeah, select them all, solo them all, export them all, and then when they're exported, I have the MIDI file that I can import, and that's what I'll do in the next part of this video. So yeah, hopefully that was interesting and valuable for you. If you've never really thought about that even as being a thing that's necessary, I totally understand. You're gonna see though in the second video why it's so important to do that work, because when I import into Dorico, you're gonna see how cleanly it comes in and how little is left for me to do from strictly a note input standpoint. So hope you liked this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel, because like I said, there's 2 more videos coming about this on the same project. The next one is going to be actually notating, and then the third one's going to be recording with the orchestra. If you are watching this and it's been out for a little bit, part 2 is probably already available around me somewhere. So go ahead and click on that and watch it. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. All right.